In this video, we're going to talk about how do I bid on a house at auction. Bidding on a house at auction can be an exciting way to score a great deal, but it's not as simple as raising your hand in the air and winning at your bid. In this video, we're going to break down the step-by-step process on bidding on a house at auction so you could go in with confidence and come out on top. So we're going to cover topics such as different auction types, researching the property, getting your financing in order, how do you actually bid, and then what to do after you bid. And so by the end of this video, you'll be an expert on all things auction, especially on how do you bid at auction. Me and Paul, we've been doing this for decades, buying houses through auctions. So let's dive into it. First thing we're going to cover is just understanding the auction type. And there are three main types of auctions. It's a foreclosure auction, it's a tax lien auction, or it could be like a private real estate auction. And the first type is a foreclosure auction. And these are usually held at the courthouse or online. And these auctions are for properties that got behind on lender payments and they've been repossessed by the lenders essentially. So they're right before they become an REO. The second type are tax lien auctions. And these are where someone might have not paid their real estate taxes for 2 or 3 years, depending on state and county. And then from there, those are usually different types of upset tax sales that are out there that are held once or twice a year. Again, varies by state and county. And most of those are in-person auctions. And then lastly, someone could just sell their house, like you inherited property through an estate sale and you don't want to go through the MLS and normal listing process. You could just put your property up for auction and be done with it essentially. So those, now you know the three types of auction. Next thing you want to do before you start bidding on a property is researching the property. So before bidding, you want to get as much information as you can about the property, right? What's the current condition of the property? Some auctions out there will display photos such as like an REO auction, whereas other auction sites such as like a sheriff's sale or tax sale, probably just going to have a property address and a few basic information about the property, no online photos. So you might want to assume that the property needs everything, or if it's a local market, visit it or get someone to kind of look in the windows and take a look at the condition of the property. So once you understand the rehab work needed and what it would sell for after renovations or after repair value, that's called, you could then go in there and back off holding cost, financing costs, and how much profit you want to make to come up with a maximum bid amount. So that's important. You want to determine your maximum bid amount on each property that you have before going into auction. That way you take emotions, out of it and kind of stick to your numbers. So that's researching the property. The next thing you want to go into before bidding is making sure you have your finances in order. So a lot of times different auctions out there have different requirements regarding proof of funds or a pre-approval letter. Some are only a cash sale, some are allow financing. So if you go to different auction sites out there, they'll kind of tell you what type of sale that property is, whether it's cash only or some type of financing like an asset-based lender is allowed. We've got plenty of other videos on private lending and asset-based lending on our channel, so feel free to dive into those as we go pretty deep into those topics. So now that you have your financing in order, right, you want to register for the property auction. And you just can't show up, whether it's in person or online. You got to do a few steps before. If it's an in-person auction, usually they'll tell you ahead of time, the courthouse or the county website, I should say, on what you need to bring to the courthouse, such as probably some kind of government issued photo ID, like a driver's license or passport. You'll have to submit some kind of proof of funds too, that you have the money to put down today and X days later for closing. And you want to probably arrive earlier. You don't want, if the auction starts at 11, you want to get there a little bit, like at least a half hour earlier to go through the registration process. Now, if it's an online auction, these are usually spread out over a few days, and you could go on. If you're new to a site, you create an account where it'll verify your identity, and you'll upload any information about yourself, such as the proof of funds and IDs and what entity you're buying in, things like that. So once you're registered, whether it's online or in person, then you'll essentially be allowed to bid. And if you're in person, you'll get a bidding number. And if you're online, it's obviously you have an online profile that they know who you are when bidding. Now let's talk about the bidding process, the heart of the video here. And this is how it typically works. You usually have a starting bid. So an auction begins with some kind of minimum bid. It could be as low as $1 I've seen. And if it's an expensive property, it could be like, $500,000 or more. This is basically a lot of times also, based on market value where the properties are and how much is left on the loan. And then there's different incremental bidding amounts that you have. Some are as little as 500 to 1,000. Others could jump at 10,000. I've seen as high as 25,000. Again, it depends on the value of the property and how the auctioneer wants to set that up. So that's something to consider too on knowing what the next bid amount is and a little bit of strategy where if it's starting at 40K, but your max bid is 50, do you want to wait or you want to be the first bidder? It kind of depends on what that bid increments are and how many rings of the bell you can potentially get with bidding. And then there's also reserve prices. And they're not always displayed on all, but some auctions have a hidden reserve, some are stated. And it's basically, this is the number the auction has to hit for you to be able to win the bid and the company accept your offer. So I'll give an example. In some REO properties that we've bid on auction, the stated reserve might be $100,000. However, if we were the highest bidder at the end of the auction at $80,000, that doesn't necessarily mean we win that property because it's under the reserve amount. So a lot of times with those types of auction is two things. One, it'll just go back onto the next auction cycle and you continue to bid on it. Or two, there might be some negotiation behind the scenes with the seller, in this case, the bank, where they might come back with, hey, are you willing to accept 90 instead of 100 or 80, what you bid? So those are things to consider there from a strategy perspective. And I always want to emphasize this when bidding. I mentioned this earlier. Have your max bid going into the auction. You want to stay calm, take emotion out of it, and stick to your numbers. I know it can get exciting, especially towards the end of an auction, if people are bidding or you're on a computer platform and the numbers are going back and forth, and they extended another 15 minutes towards the end because there's a lot of volume. Stick to your numbers, take the emotion out of it, because what you don't want at the end of the day is an asset or a property that you bought that you're now 20K over than what you should have been, and you're not going to make any money on the deal. So stick to your numbers. And what I will do now is show an example of an auction site just to help everyone out here. And here's an auction.com one. And if you just go here to buy, you'll see different types of auction: foreclosure, bank owned, private seller. Again, those are the three auction types that we talked about earlier. And if you go back, let's just pick foreclosure. So these are more of your courthouse, sheriff's sale type of properties. And let's just do nationwide here. And then these are just random 100 properties near some Western PA town of different sheriff's sale. And you can kind of see here, this is an active property scheduled for auction. It's labeled here foreclosure. This was an REO, it'd say REO. If it was a private sale, it'd say private sale, all driven off this indicator here. And you can see here the date on when the auction will be, the start time. Since this is going to be at the courthouse here, they're also putting it online. And they haven't showed any other information yet, but in this case, you can kind of see the case file number, the property details, it's vacant. This is a cash only, right? There's no conventional financing allowed. And, this is just one example. Now, if we go to a bank owned, see what that looks like, pick a random property here. Pick this one here. This is in Baltimore. Again, you see here, this is bank owned. Opening bid on this property is 65. So if you do quick analysis up front and your maximum bid could only be 60, don't bother signing up for this property, right? Wait until this opening bid comes down. And in this case, this property, since it's an REO, will be ran over a few days. And this is the opening bid. And I talked about bid increments earlier. This case is pretty a steep one, especially on a property size. It's 25K is the next bid. So it'd be $90,000 your next bid. And here they state the reserve is not met. However, it's a hidden number, so you don't know what that is. An example of something we just talked about. In this case, they tell you it's occupied and what the taxes and liens are, if any. And that's just an example there of auction.com. You go to a county, Philadelphia County here, they have under the real estate section or current auctions, they have an analysis here showing what's needed. And then, settlement requirements, 15 days from the auction date to pay the balances. Whereas these on the REOs, I don't think it's stated here yet, unless it's in the files below. You'll usually have about 30 days to close. And Philadelphia actually uses an online site to do theirs. I think it's Biz Assets that we displayed on a different video. So if we go back to um, now that you have a flavor of what different auction sites look like and what some of the terms are and some bidding strategies on how do you bid, what happens if you win at auction? So kind of like close the loop, right? You understood the bidding, you had a strategy going in, and now what happens if you win? So, first it's congrats, you won the property. And here's what essentially happens next. Again, depending if it's in person versus online, you're going to have to pay the deposit. For some in-person ones, they're due that day. I had the Philadelphia site open earlier. I'm reading it now. The purchaser shall pay the balance of the 10% of the purchase price by 5 p.m. on the first business day following the auction. So that's just one example of one county. Whereas an online auction, you might have 2 to 3 business days to pay the earnest money deposit. And they're going to vary. Like the county one that I just read is 10% of purchase always, whereas some online auctions might be as low as 500 up to 5% of purchase price. So that those are usually a tight time window to pay that deposit. And then you send over the contract, worked with that. Then once the seller approves, you have what we call the start of the closing process, right? You got anywhere up to 30 days to close usually on these. In looking at the Philadelphia County site for foreclosure, you have 15 calendar days to close. Whereas an REO property, they'll usually go out 25, 30 days. So just be aware of the remaining balance and the time commitment you need to get once you win a property at auction. And then lastly, during this process, get title search done and everything else, making sure you buy clean property, clean title, no surprises. That way, when you do sell the property, it's a clean title that you're selling as well. And to wrap up with just some tips for success at the auctions. Like I mentioned, do your homework, research the properties thoroughly and know the auction rules and have that maximum bid going into the auction before you bid. And from there, once you have the maximum bid, you kind of know what budgeting you need to do to get that after repair value. And at the auction, stay focused, stick to your numbers, don't get emotions involved. Because a lot of people sometimes will extend that max bid price. They kind of get lost in the moment, essentially, and you want to avoid overpaying as much as possible. And then, have a backup plan. Be prepared to walk away. Maybe if as you're leading up to the auction, if you're get another opinion on the property. If you came up with a max offer or max bid of $60,000, make sure you have someone else kind of look at it, get confirmation from a local expert, like a local agent that you'll be listing the property with later if you're buying, renovating, and reselling. And that way you go in with feeling good about your numbers and sticking to them. So hopefully, this video is a lot of helpful for you you now understand how to bid on a house at auction and how it can be a great source of deal flow for you, especially if you're a real estate investor. You might have your one arm of where you're, doing a lot of marketing out there to home sellers. This is a great way of just, buying properties to increase your rental portfolio to your buy, renovate, resell portfolio. These auctions, a lot of great deals are out there. If you got a lot of video value out of this video, smash the like button. Feel free to share with someone else that you think might be beneficial to. And again, we got a lot of other videos down there regarding private lending and other ways to navigate the auction sites in the description below. And